Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ashish Palekar. I am responsible for our snapshots and EBS Edge business. And so a big part of my role is talking to you all, understanding what your needs are, what your requirements are, and then making sure we build the right products. So today I'm going to cover, it's a 200-level session. I'm covering data, protecting your data and securing your retention, along with some new capabilities that we announced at re:Invent. So we have a lot to cover. The agenda for today is around intro to EBS snapshots. We'll cover what's new with snapshots, do a little bit of basics, cover direct APIs, cover data lifecycle manager, and then end with snapshots and outposts. Before I get started, just by show of hands, how many of you use snapshots, in your words, extensively? Just show of hands, raise quickly. Okay, some of you. So the basics might be basic for some of you, but I'll cover the rest because it's important to bring the audience up to speed anyways. So let's get started. So this is the AWS storage portfolio. We have offerings in object, we have offerings in file, we have offerings in block storage, specifically EBS, and then we have a series of hybrid edge storage services and data movement services, and then we have a set of data services. And snapshots fits in the data services portion of our portfolio. Let's start with the basics. When we think about block storage offerings, we really think of three things. We have instance storage, which is SSD and HDD. We have EBS, SSD-backed storage. Think of our GP3 and IO2 volume types. And then HDD-backed, which is our ST1 and SC1 volume types. So what are EBS snapshots? So if you think of an EC2 instance and an EBS volume in an availability zone, an EBS snapshot is a point-in-time backup of that EBS volume. That is stored on Amazon S3. And its properties are, it is incremental, so that only the changed blocks are stored. It is crash consistent, so completed IOs are persisted in the next snapshot, and they can be shared and copied across accounts. How do customers use it? So we think of three main use cases that we see with customers. The first one is for backup and disaster recovery. So imagine having an EBS volume with a snapshot that's taken, that volume fails or has an issue. In those scenarios, snapshots can be used to restore and create the next EBS volume. Some customers also copy and share these snapshots across accounts and do their restores in a different region to make sure that they can recover. The second use case is a refresh or a scale-up or a data handoff workflow. What do we mean by that? Imagine a volume. That volume has data that gets updated. Think of trading workflows or what have you. At the end of the day, the previous volume is deleted. From that snapshot, you create an Amazon machine image or an AMI, and then use that AMI to go create other instances. Same thing, you can take that snapshot, share it across accounts, and go from one account to another as another way to get more access to that data. And the third use case is really something new, and we'll cover later today, is about non-EBS backup and migration. Here, customers are on premises, have a disk, and from that disk, they are able to migrate directly into a snapshot. So really, when we think of the use cases, it's in those three pillars, backup and DR, refresh and scale up and handoff, and then non-EBS backup and migration. Obviously, all of this is only possible because of our customers, and so customers and partners. And so thank you to all these customers and partners that use EBS snapshots today. Let's dive into the basics. Okay, so one of the questions I get asked often is, how do snapshots store data? So let's walk through a simple use case. You have a snapshot, you have a volume, it's an empty volume, nothing's written to it. It's a 1 terabyte volume. You take a snapshot, Nothing gets stored in that snapshot, and in fact, it's an empty snapshot with no billable data. Now, imagine you write 3 files or 3 blocks into that snapshot, and then you take your first snapshot, then all those 3 blocks will be in that first snapshot, and those will be your billable blocks. Now, let's imagine you deleted blocks 1 and 2, but added blocks 4, 5, 6. You take a second snapshot. 3 will be referenced from the first snapshot. 4, 5, 6 will be net new. And so your billable blocks in snapshot 2 are just 4, 5, 6. Imagine now you write 3 more blocks, 7, 8, 9. Take yet another snapshot. Your billable blocks in snapshot number 3 are 7, 8, 9, and 3, 4, 5, 6 are all reference blocks. Okay? What happens when you delete a snapshot? So now 1, 2, 3 got deleted from the original snapshot. Remember, 3 was a reference in snapshot 2. 1 and 2 were deleted by the time snapshot 2 was taken. What happens is 3 gets converted into a non-reference block. And so in fact, the block moves from snapshot 1 to snapshot 2. And so now your billable blocks in snapshot 2 changes to 3, 4, 5, 6. This concept is important because later on we will talk about some new things that we've launched. So it's important to understand how cost changes when you manage snapshots. It's one of the questions we get asked the most often. So what are the key things to remember? Every snapshot functions as a full point-in-time backup. Each EBS snapshot is stored incrementally, and you only charge for what you've written. Next topic to cover there is consistency. So we say EBS snapshots are crash consistent. What does that mean? Well, there are 2 types of consistency models. One is called crash consistency, another is called application consistency. So in crash consistency, we write the blocks that have already been committed to disk. Data that is not flushed to disk is not stored on the snapshot. The equivalent of that is almost as if you had a power cable that was pulled out of a server. Application consistency is slightly different. In application consistency, you actually pause the application, you flush the IOs from the memory buffers or application buffers onto disk, and then unpause the application. So snapshots are crash consistent. We'll talk about how you can do the freeze, unfreeze operations for application consistency, but snapshots inherently are crash consistent. Another question that we get asked is, what if I have multiple EBS volumes that are attached to an EC2 instance? So in this case, we have a variant of a command called create snapshots that will actually take a crash consistent cut of all the volumes attached to your EC2 instance. And so you can either include your root volume or you can exclude your root volume, but you have the option of taking snapshots of all the volumes attached to an EC2 instance that is crash consistent, something that we see customers do a lot of. So remember I talked about application consistency? So with Systems Manager, AWS Systems Manager, we have VSS support. So Windows has volume shadow copy, and volume shadow copy supports application consistency without needing application-specific hooks. So if you use System Manager run command, you can use VSS-enabled snapshots and take an application-consistent cut for your snapshots attached to that Windows instance. So another super useful capability if you need application consistency for your application. So this session was about secure retention. So let's start with encryption. So when we think about encryption, EBS uses our key management service, KMS, and we use AES 256 encryption. We use customer managed keys. Encryption has some interesting properties that are important to remember. When you encrypt an EBS volume, data at rest inside the volume is fully encrypted. Data moving between the volume and instance is encrypted. Snapshots created from an encrypted volume are encrypted. Volumes created from such snapshots are also encrypted. And you can encrypt or re-encrypt snapshots when you copy the snapshot. Right? So once a volume is encrypted, that entire chain of snapshots and volumes starts to get fully encrypted. but snapshots are different than EBS volumes. In what ways? Snapshots can be shared across accounts, copied across accounts, copied within accounts, copied across regions, and you can create Amazon machine images or armies. So how do you share a snapshot? If you go into the snapshot console, look for modify permissions, or if you like the CLI, like me, you can use describe snapshot attribute or modify snapshot attribute, and in that way, you can start to share snapshots. There's two ways to share snapshots, public and private. And I'll talk about public in a minute, but almost always choose private and provide the account that you want to share your permissions with. So public sharing is a reasonable use case for some specific use cases. Think AWS Marketplace armies. But for most customers, for most snapshots, do not publicly share snapshots. Use the private sharing feature to share with specific accounts. If you want to launch a volume from a snapshot, you need a copy of that snapshot in the region. So one of the things that we see customers asking us about is, can I launch a snapshot? Can I launch a volume in a different region? The answer is no, you need a copy within local to that region. So then how do I check if I have snapshots that are public in my account? Two ways. In the UI, you can click on the console, look at the permissions tab, and you can see that the snapshot is public. Or you can do a create volume permission and check the output. And if you see group equals all, you're sharing that snapshot publicly. Definitely urge you to check to make sure you're sharing snapshots with the least privileges possible as you think about your use cases. Let's talk about copy snapshots. Let me just build this out. So in copy snapshots, Amazon S3 encryption protects the snapshots in transit during the copy operation. Unencrypted snapshots can be encrypted during the copy. You can also change your key. As you would expect, the first copy is always a full copy. Subsequent copies are incremental. If you have an encrypted snapshot, then you need the same CMK across both accounts in order to copy the snapshot as an incremental. So how do you encrypt or re-encrypt during a copy? Go to the copy tab. You can see the option as the copy wizard comes up. You can see the option to encrypt the snapshot. You can do the same thing on the CLI, just to copy snapshot, provide a KMS key, and you're off to the races in terms of encrypting the snapshot. One of the use cases of copy that we see customers do is customers copying snapshots across accounts and across regions. And then what they do is they will lock down the permissions in that target snapshot copy. So the reason they copy across multiple regions is to protect against regional events. And then the permission lockdown is to prevent malicious or unintentional deletes of data. So this is a fairly common pattern that we are seeing emerge is customers copying their snapshots across regions and across accounts and then locking down the permission to get better DR protection as well as to get protection against malicious or unintentional deletes. So how have we made encryption easier? So there are three features I want to talk about today that'll help make the encryption journey easier for you as a customer. First one is how to create encrypted volumes from unencrypted snapshots or armies. So previously, and in a lot of workflows that I talk to customers, if you had an unencrypted snapshot or an army, you had to copy it and encrypt it, and then you had to create an encrypted volume from that encrypted snapshot. With our encryption feature that we've built, you can now take an unencrypted snapshot or an army and just launch an encrypted volume from it. Right? It's as simple as your create volume command with just the encrypted tab. It'll pick your key, and you can go launch an encrypted volume. If you now want to share your encrypted volumes or snapshots, encrypted snapshots or armies across accounts, that's the second feature. So previously, if you had an encrypted snapshot that was in account 1, you would need to copy it into account 2, and then launch an encrypted volume in account 2. Okay? Now, if you have a snapshot or an army that is encrypted with a custom CMK, you can just share that snapshot across accounts, and then launch an encrypted volume directly. Remember, if you do choose a default CMK, which is the AWS managed keys, then this won't work. But if you have custom CMKs that you're using for encryption, you can just share and launch directly from that. So how do you do this? You go to the KMS console. In the KMS console, you select your key, and you share an account with which you want to share that key, and you're off to the races. Right? So if you now combine the two features, you get something pretty powerful. If you have an unencrypted snapshot or an account, AMI in account 1, you used to have to copy it to account 2, encrypt it, and then launch a volume from it. Instead, if you have an unencrypted snapshot or an AMI in account 1, you can just share it and launch an encrypted volume without ever having to copy it across. Again, if you have an encrypted snapshot in account 1, remember, this will only work for those snapshots encrypted with custom CMKs. Then how did we take it further? Customers were asking us to say, hey, how can we ensure that all our EBS volumes in an account are fully encrypted? So previously, here's what customers did. Customers would set up IAM policies to prevent their internal customers from launching unencrypted volumes or snapshots. Another thing that we've seen customers do is take unencrypted volumes, snapshot those, copy those to an encrypted volume, attach that encrypted volume to make sure that nobody has unencrypted snapshots or volumes. So we looked at this workflow, and we thought this was pretty complicated. And so one of the things that we did is now launch an account-level regional setting that essentially ensures that all new volumes and snapshots from that point on are fully encrypted. And this is without any change to your workflows. So how do you do this? Go to your EC2 settings on your EC2 console. There's a button that says Always Encrypt New EBS Volumes. Click it, select your key, and that's it. Right? From that point on, every new volume or snapshot you create will always be fully encrypted. Super important, especially as you're thinking about security in your environments, to just enable this. Lots of customers have had good success with it. Okay, let's jump to new capabilities after covering the basics. Let's talk about Recycle Bin for EBS snapshots. How many of you have heard of Recycle Bin for snapshots? Show of hands. Good. So this capability we launched at reInvent last year. Let's talk about why Recycle Bin. So one of the things we see is users accidentally delete their EBS snapshots. There's no way to undelete that snapshot. Checks can help, but really it's really not foolproof. And in fact, snapshots especially tend to be valued because they're often the last copies of data. And so Recycle Bin is something that that our team launched to automatically retain deleted snapshots for a user-specified retention period. So what is Recycle Bin? Really the goal is quick recovery of deleted snapshots. You can automatically retain snapshots for a retention period of your choosing, the minimum being 1 day. You can use retention rules to specify the retention period for all snapshots in an account or tagged snapshots within an account. You can recover deleted snapshots before the retention time expiry. You'll pay the same snapshot price for snapshots in the Recycle Bin, and you can then restrict access to Recycle Bin rules to your administrator IAM roles so that you can lock down access. So how does it work? Step 1, you can set up the retention rules, either account level or tag level. Step 2, we will retain that deleted snapshot in Recycle Bin based on those rules. And step 3, you can recover those deleted snapshots before expiry of the retention period. Let's walk through all of them. So managing the retention rules. So 3 things really define a rule, right? 1 is retention time. How long do you want to retain your snapshot in a Recycle Bin? After that expiry period, the snapshot is permanently deleted. Then second, do you want an account level rule, meaning apply that retention rule to all snapshots in your account? Or do you want a tag-based rule to apply only to tagged snapshots in your account. Again, if you're protecting critical snapshots, tag-based rules might be a way for you to optimize your costs. So let's set up retention rules without tags. When you set up retention rules without tags, pretty simple. We have a recycle bin console. You can set it up, just set up for your account, set up the retention period, and you're all set. Or you can use the create rule command that you can use to match all snapshots. With tags, a little more options. In this case, I set it up with rbin test1. You provide that tag. You can set it up in the same recycle bin console. You can then use get rule to list your rules. So this is just a listing of the rules that are available to me in my account. And that's how you go set the rules. Let's talk about managing your recycle bin snapshots. So what happens to a snapshot on deletion? Let's take this one. In this particular case, I have snapshots. I'm looking at my snapshot console. I'm also looking at my recycle bin console. It's empty. And now I choose to delete one of the snapshots. So in this case, the snapshot number 4, which is recycle bin snap test 4, I'm going to go delete. It has the dev resource tag, so that rule is going to apply. The tag-based retention rule kicks in. It's a 3-day retention rule. And then when you now list your snapshots in the recycle bin, the deleted snapshot from rbin, which is the snap 4, is now in the recycle bin. Okay? This snapshot will now be retained for 3 days. When you now want to recover a snapshot from a recycle bin, pretty straightforward command, just restore the snapshot, and the snapshot will now move back from the recycle bin back into the snapshots console. So in fact, the recovered snapshots can be used immediately. For all intents and purposes, once you restore the snapshot, it's just like any other. And so super easy to go restore volumes just like you would before. One other thing I want to cover is managing your recycle bin permissions, because these are now sort of the repository of deleted snapshots. So use IAM rules to restrict recycle bin rules and restrict access to recycle bin rules and resources. You can use the IAM administrator role for managing recycle bin rule APIs, and you can use the snapshot user role to manage access to snapshot APIs. So here's an example of the administrator IAM role permissions. Right? All the function commands are listed within sort of the administrator rules. Here's the snapshot user IAM role example. Specifically here, list snapshots in recycle bin and restore snapshots from recycle bin is listed as net new commands. You can optionally only store those in the recycle bin administrator role if you want stricter access. So what are our considerations for using recycle bin? These are just some things to keep in mind as you're using this feature. So we support up to 250 rules per account and 50 tags per rule. We think this is a healthy limit. If you have a use case that expands beyond these, come talk to me. We prioritize tag-level retention rules over account-level retention rules. Tag-level retention rules are more granular and will take precedence over account-level retention rule. When you're using tag-level retention rules, if there are multiple rules, the most conservative, which is the one with the longest retention, will win. If you use capabilities like fast snapshot restore will be disabled, and you will have to re-enable it on recovery. If you're sharing that snapshot, that sharing is disabled when the snapshot is in recycle bin, you will now have to restore that permission, where permissions are retained when you recover. And then you can add, delete, or modify tags allowed for recycle bin snapshots. That's it on recycle bin. Next capability is snapshots archive. So what's the need for an archive tier for snapshots? Some customers have come back to us and said, we have some long-term retention needs, months or years. There are regulatory and compliance needs, end-of-project needs, rarely accessed snapshots, or just snapshots with lower cost. The customer ask is for lower cost storage tier for long-term retention of rarely accessed snapshots. So the team innovated And what they came up with is an EBS snapshots archive tier. I'll build the slide up. Here, what we support is long-term snapshot retention. It's a 90-day minimum retention period. These are full point-in-time backups. So unlike the previous one where we talked about always being incremental, these snapshot archives are full. You can retrieve the snapshot before use. Retrieval time is in hours, and we'll cover that. And it's a 75% lower storage cost, again, US East 1 pricing at 1.25 cents per gigabyte month compared to the 5 cents per gigabyte month for regular snapshots. And then you have 3 cents per GB additional retrieval charges. And we think this meets the customer need of low storage cost for long-term retention of rarely accessed snapshots. So how does it work? Let's go through the use case. So step one is from a snapshot in the standard tier, create an archive snapshot. Then step two is restoring that snapshot from the archive tier to the standard tier, and this can be temporary or permanent, right? Like those are the two sort of operations that are supported with archiving snapshots. Let's look at both of those. So archiving EBS snapshots. In this case, if you go to the snapshot console, you'll see a list of snapshots, and now you'll see storage tier as a new option. And let's say in this case, choose to archive one of the snapshots in that list. You would essentially call modify snapshot tier, or just right-click and call archive snapshot. And in this case, we will proceed with the archive in the background. You can call describe snapshot tier status in order to check how far along the snapshot is from an archival standpoint. Once it's tiered to archive, you will see that it's completed, and then you know that the snapshot is stored in the archive tier. And at that point, you're now getting the benefit of the lower cost storage tier. What does it mean to restore an EBS snapshot from an archive? So in this particular case, we would start with retrieving the snapshot from archive for regular use. Your retrieval time is in hours. It's based on snapshot size, ranges between 24 to 72 hours. Temporary restores can restore up to 180 days to standard tier. Permanent copy stays in archive tier. And then a second option is permanent restore. You change back from snapshot tier to standard. There's no copy left in the archive tier. And then you just have to remember the 90-day minimum period for retention in archive. So let's walk through how to restore from an archive snapshot. So in this case, I have one snapshot, the previous one that we had archived. You can now choose to restore it. The command, in this case, is restore snapshot tier. And so in this case, we will choose to restore the snapshot tier back to standard. In this case, it's a permanent restore. The second option is if you want to do a temporary restore. And with a temporary restore, you have to choose how long you want the snapshot to be available. In this case, it is for 3 days. And then, much like before, you call describe snapshot tier status to go check on where the restore status is. And when it's completed, you will see that the status changes to complete. Right? So let me just go back. In this case, when it's a temporary restore, the temporary restore will stay for 3 days, and you'll see that called out in the describe status as well. Okay. So similar to the recycle bin discussion, let's talk about considerations for archiving snapshots. So let's walk through them. There's really 3 things you need to think about. Again, your mileage may vary based on your specific use case. These 3 patterns are at least things we see. Last snapshots of inactive lineages. So if you have a lineage of snapshot and you have the last snapshot remaining, that's a candidate for something to archive. If you have the need for full snapshots for compliance, that's a reason to archive. And then the third thing is if your snapshots have a change rate that is greater than 25%, then that's a reason to archive. Like those are the 3 sort of rules of thumb to go archive. The opposite of these, or slightly opposite of these, are important to remember as not to sort of archive for cost reasons. If your snapshots are less than 25% in change rates, so it's not a candidate where you can save cost by archiving. You can still archive if you have business reasons, but it's not a cost-saving reason. If your first snapshots of active lineages, especially if it's the first snapshot that's constantly being taken, it will have a lot of forward references. And then the last snapshot of active lineages will have a lot of early references. So it's super important that you keep track of like what those lineages are doing before deciding whether to archive or not. So how do you find the change rate of snapshots? So I'll talk about direct APIs in a little bit, but you can use direct APIs. So you can do a list snapshot blocks in snapshot A, you can do a list snapshots blocks in snapshot B, and then rough rule of thumb, you can then, with the delta set of between the change blocks in snapshot A and snapshot B, you can get the change rate. And that can tell you roughly how much your change rate between the snapshots is. Okay. Other considerations to sort of remember, only the owner of the snapshot can archive a snapshot. So if you're sharing, the person that is shared to cannot archive the snapshot. FSR and sharing are disabled on archival for obvious reasons. You cannot archive ARMY snapshots, and then recycle bin is supported for snapshot archives as well, which means if you have tags for your recycle bin snapshots, for your archival snapshots, recycle bin rules will kick in just like they do for regular snapshots. In terms of customer usage, we have 3 customers who we called out during our press release. One is StemCell, and specifically they called out the ease of use and low cost for long-term retention. Zilliant, and specifically how they eliminated the need to maintain scripts to create good end flows, and Dhruva in this case is a backup partner, and what they're doing is giving customers an option to use Snapshots Archive as another tier in their backup offering for AWS. Let's talk about Data Lifecycle Manager. So one of the things that customers have asked us for is the ability to back up snapshots on a schedule. And Data Lifecycle Manager gives you the ability to create backups of instances and volumes and create armies on a schedule. You can define policies on when to create snapshots, when to delete snapshots. You can control your snapshot costs by deciding which snapshots stay for how long. And then you can use IAM policies to control policy access, and there is no cost to use. So what sort of policies can you define? Really boils down to two simple things, right? The user requirement in this case is I want all EBS volumes attached to my EC2 instance to be backed once per day, with copies being saved for 7 days. So in this case, what we say is the tags are vol type root. Again, we use tags. You can create every 24 hours, you provide a start time, and retain the most recent 7. So how do you do that in DLM? You can add tags to the volumes you want to associate with your DLM policies, and then you can start to use the DLM scheduling feature. So you can select whether to use volumes or instances. If you choose instances, all volumes attached to that instance will be snapshotted. You can input the appropriate volume tags that you want to target. And then you can schedule snapshots every hour for up to 24 hours. And that gives you the 3 properties we talked about earlier, which is which volumes, which tags, and for how long. You can now do multiple schedules in a single policy. So you can take a single policy, choose schedule 1, and a very, very common pattern that customers can use is daily, weekly, and monthly. Retain dailies for a week, weeklies for a month, and monthlies for a year. It's a very common pattern that customers use. You can also use custom cron expressions, so that is also now supported, and you get really flexible scheduling options with DLM. Last but not the least, you can now specify a time-based retention, which is instead of just a count-based retention, which is 5 or 6 or what have you, you can now say, I retain it for X days, weeks, months, or years if you have to. And then the last important capability there is you can now automate copies across regions as well. So if you have a specific schedule on which you need your snapshots copied across accounts, copied across regions, or copied across accounts, you can use the DLM cross-region copy feature to provide just that. Much like we talked about DLM, we also have another sort of capability we call AWS Backup, which covers a much broader suite than DLM. DLM covers volumes and snapshots, but if you want a single pane of glass where you can cover backups of different services, then backup is another offering that offers capabilities to give you consistent backups across all these services in a single pane of glass. All right, still on track. Let's do direct APIs. Lots to cover. So with EBS Direct APIs, you can read or write access to snapshots. With this set of APIs, you can create snapshots from any source. You can list blocks in a snapshot. You can read blocks in parallel. You can compare snapshots, and you can read change blocks. Why did we do this? So previously, when customers wanted to back up their block storage from on-premises, they would set up replication, go to Amazon S3, from S3, restore it to a volume. That volume would take snapshots. You would find delta sets, and then continue taking additional snapshots. And then eventually recover in a DR scenario with a different volume. So super challenging to execute that use case. Now with the write APIs, you can directly write data to a snapshot, and from the snapshot, you can use things like fast snapshot restore to restore directly to an EBS volume. What about the read? The read use case was customers would have volumes. They would create 2 points in time, and this was specific to backup and DR partners. They would then create a volume, compare the 2 volumes using an EC2 instance to get the delta set, and those change blocks would then get written to Amazon S3. Now, you can just use EBS Direct APIs, get the change blocks without any of those process changes in between. The customer impact is that you now have faster recovery times and faster recovery points through your backup providers. So what is the API? Really, on the right side, there's 3 APIs. You can start a block snapshot, you can put snapshot block, and then complete the block snapshot. So those are the 3 operations. You can start, put blocks in, and then complete that block snapshot. Here's what the JSON looks like. So it's a simple start snapshot command. You put blocks in, and you have the output that is going in. You can also list the change blocks. And with the change blocks, you will get the listing of what the block indexes are and where the data is being stored. And here's a read snapshot API example. You can get the snapshot block and get a list of what the APIs are. But a combination of these read and write APIs, especially as you're thinking about applications and building solutions, is a really powerful tool for sort of your backup and DR applications. But we are not done there yet, and lots more to do on that front. How many have heard of Outposts? Some of you, okay. So let me just walk through a little bit of what we do for Outposts. Today we have the concept of regions, and then customers have come and told us, I still have to meet my low latency needs by being close to my customers. I still have data residency needs, and I still have needs, especially if you're in the 5G network space. And I need infrastructure that is closer to those domains. And then there's the whole use cases around IoT and rugged edge. Let's focus on that middle bucket. For that middle bucket, when customers started, when we launched Outposts, customers started using Outposts. EBS was launched when Outposts was available. And so you could put Outposts in your corporate data center, and EBS was stored on it. And then in order to take a snapshot, you would copy that snapshot to a region. And if that region doesn't happen to be in your jurisdiction, you couldn't meet your data residency needs. So what we launched is 2 things. One, the Amazon S3 team launched S3 on Outposts. And then building on top of it, we launched EBS Local Snapshots on Outposts. And what that means is for customers who are taking backups of their EBS volumes with snapshots, all those snapshots are now stored locally within that outpost, thereby helping these customers meet their data residency needs. So we talked about snapshots in a region, but we are also expanding the usage by bringing snapshots to the edge. So what are things you need to remember as you think about snapshots and outposts? So first, store your snapshots, store snapshots of EBS volumes on S3 on Outposts. If you have S3 on Outposts, you can create snapshots with exactly the same API commands, same CLI commands. You have to specify the outpost you want it to. You can copy snapshots or armies from regions to outposts. You can also use DLM to manage your outpost snapshots, so all the same use cases work. You can use IAM policies to manage access to those snapshots. And these snapshots, because we were able to launch this with Outposts, are encrypted by default. So you don't have to choose between what type of encryption to provide. And that's the middle bucket, is we have now extended snapshots, and this is a new journey for us, to bring local snapshots to the edge, and we're excited to see what customers can end up doing with it. That covers all the journey of snapshots, the basics, all the things we launched with RecycleBin, with Data Lifecycle Manager, data EBS Snapshots Archive, all the way up to what we are doing on Outposts. Appreciate you folks taking the time. There are some search skills and other things that happy for you to go look at. If you want to reach me and connect with me, I'm on Twitter at LogicalBlock. I'm also happy to stop by here and take questions. Would certainly appreciate any feedback you have for the session. We do look at these and use these to improve our presentations. With that, happy to take questions. I can stand by the side. We do pass the mic along. Would be good to understand.
Which of these new features are available on GovCloud?
Sorry, say that again?
Of the new features that you talked about right now.
Yeah, so the encryption features are available. RecycleBin and Snapshots Archives are not today. Are you asking GovCloud on GovCloud specifically? I believe, how about this? Stop by afterwards and we can go through the list. The list has been changing, so I can give you a more detailed on what's the latest there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. I have the scenario, if the volume is initially not encrypted, but when you take a snapshot, it is encrypted. And from that snapshot, if I want to create a volume, is it going to be encrypted or not?
Yeah, so let's start with the first assumption. If a volume is not encrypted, when you take the snapshot, it will not be encrypted. You then have to either copy that snapshot and make it encrypted, right? But once you make that encrypted snapshot, if you launch volumes from that encrypted snapshot, they will be fully encrypted. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So from an encrypted volume, you can't create, from an unencrypted volume, you can't create an encrypted snapshot in one step.
Oh, that's why, because one of the slides got confused.
Yeah. What that slide was trying to show is you can now take an unencrypted snapshot and launch an encrypted volume. So so as an example, you can take an unencrypted volume, create an unencrypted snapshot, and then to launch an encrypted volume, you no longer need to copy it. You can just provide a key and launch a volume, making it fully encrypted. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions?
So what is the difference between creating an image for an instance or taking a snapshot of the instance?
Sorry, I couldn't hear two parts of it.
The difference between creating an image for a snapshot for an instance or taking a snapshot of the instance?
Your question is, what is the difference between taking an instance level snapshot versus taking a volume level snapshot?
Well, no, creating an image from...
creating an image versus taking a snapshot. Yep, okay. An army is storing more information about the metadata for the instance, right? The snapshot itself is just a copy of the disk. So that's the way to think about the differences. The Army is going to store information about the instance and is going to store an image. An Army is also directly bootable, so you can supply an Army to boot an instance. You can't just boot something from a snapshot.
So if I take a snapshot of an instance, if the instance has volume attached to it, will that be also included in the snapshot?
You have to provide it, yeah. So if it will create a series of snapshots that are associated with that image, but you'll have to provide the block device mapping as you're loading the new instance. But yes, it will take snapshots, but you have to provide the block device mapping when you boot the instance.
Okay, can I take a snapshot of the root volume?
Can I take a snapshot of a boot volume? Yes, you can.
Okay, but I cannot attach it again when I have a new instance.
When you say attach a boot volume, you can attach any volume, but for the boot volume to actually do its boot thing, you need an image because that image is what's going to attach it during the boot process.
Exactly, and then if I wanted to have the root volume of my snapshot to that instance, how do I do that?
You would use the image. You would use create image and create that boot volume. That would be your image to attach it.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good questions. More questions? Okay. I'll be happy to stand by, take more questions if you have them. Appreciate you guys spending the time with us this morning. I do have one follow-up that we can go look at. Someone was asking about capabilities in GovCloud. But otherwise, thank you for your time this morning, and thank you for being EBS and Snapshots and AWS customers. Appreciate it. Thank you.